From CNN World Headquarters in Atlanta, this is CNN Sunday Morning. Time now for today's Faces of Faith. You may have heard about the North Carolina pastor who called for the elimination of all gays and lesbians. But it wasn't just his plan that got eyes popping. It was also how he wanted to do it. Listen to this.
Build a great, big, large fence, 150 or 100-mile long. Put all the lesbians in there. Fly over and drop some food. Do the same thing with the queers and the homosexuals. And have that fence electrified till they can't get out. Feed them. And you know what? In a few years, they'll die out.
That pastor's name is Charles Worley. He's a preacher at the Providence Road Baptist Church just outside Charlotte. CNN's Gary Tuckman traveled there this week, and listen to what some of Worley's supporters had to say.
He would give you the shirt off his back. He would do anything he could for you.
I mean, he said in church that he wants to put gay people behind electric fences and have them all die out. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, that's not really what he said. He said, yes, he said some of that, but he was going to feed them and everything else, and you know that.
Why, so you're saying that it's okay if you feed them?
Well, I'm not saying it's okay one way or the other. What I'm saying, that is his opinion.
Probably the most compassionate man I've ever known. I don't know, he's just got a big heart for people.
Joining me now to talk more about this, faith and culture writer Jonathan Merritt. He's the author of A Faith of Our Own, Following Jesus Beyond the Culture Wars. Jonathan, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, there's more at play here than just the pastor's comments. There's the issue of preaching politics at the pulpit as well. We're going to get to more on that in a moment, but I want to ask you your reaction to his comments.
You know, when I hear those comments on there, and I can't hear what his congregant calls compassion at all, but when I hear his comments, or even the comments of the other North Carolina pastor a few weeks ago who advocated for physically abusing limp-wristed children. I mean, a host of words come to my mind: inappropriate, inexcusable, ignorant. But I think the word that really sticks out in my mind is unchristian. Because if you take this clip that you just showed and you put it up next to the teachings and ministry of Jesus Christ we find in the New Testament, there is a chasm between the two of those things that I can't, quite frankly, find a bridge long enough to cross that divide.
Several Christian commentators say that the pastor he's on the fringe. He's a fringe radical. He's not representative of the mainstream. Do you think that that's the case?
Well, I think that in one case that is right, because I think he is probably out of step with most Christians in America. But in another sense, that's very untrue. When you think about mainstream Christian leaders, there's still a faction among Christian leaders of hateful and even homophobic individuals in America. You take a person like Judge Roy Moore in Alabama. You remember he was famous a few years ago for the Ten Commandments debacle in that state. He has toured in mainstream Christian churches all across this country and is on record as saying that homosexuality is an abhorrent crime, a detestable crime against nature that should be punishable by law. Or you take a person like David Barton, who's been making his rounds on the mainstream media outlets recently. He's got a book out now with one of the largest evangelical publishers in the United States, with Thomas Nelson. He says that homosexuality should be regulated, and even compares it to things like salt and cigarettes and trans fats, and as apparently laudable policy points to Thomas Jefferson, who he claims, and I can find this nowhere on the internet or in any books, but says he authored a bill that would punish sodomy by castration. So I think that it's time that the mainstream Christians who are out of step with this guy stop listening to the leaders who are in step with him.
Well, let's talk about this notion of loving the sinners, but hating the sin. Because from Worley, at least, we hear a lot more hating than anything else, not much of the love, right? So is this whole thing really just a facade?
Well, I don't know that I can judge his heart, so I don't know that I can say it is a facade or that there's some sort of loaded motive. I can only take him at his word. What I do think is that we do a lot more hating sin as Christians in America than we do loving anyone. And so that can be frustrating, especially when it comes to this conversation. I do believe that I'm a part of a new generation of Christians who are rising up, who say enough is enough. And we are increasingly intolerant of this kind of hate speech, which I think doesn't reflect very accurately on the message that Jesus promoted.
I want to talk to you more about what you just mentioned, but let's play just one more snippet from the sermon that Pastor Worley gave, where he starts talking specifically politics and President Obama. Listen.
I'll tell you right now, somebody said, who you going to vote for? I ain't going to vote for a baby killer and a homosexual lover.
I mean, you listen to this. This clearly violates the church's tax-exempt status. I mean, it's mixing politics and religion. What do you think should happen here?
Well, Randy, get ready, because in the fall, when Pulpit Freedom Sunday campaign comes around, we're going to be having lots of conversations about this. Church pastors are going to come out in droves. This is a real problem. And what a lot of people don't know is it's not just a problem on the right, it's actually a problem on the left. A 2010 study showed that 44% of conservative evangelical pastors say they publicly endorsed a candidate. But what's interesting is 40% of more liberal mainline pastors said they did the same thing. So both sides in America are actually guilty of reducing their congregations to a voting bloc, of using their pulpits as platforms for partisan politicking. And it is time that we in America decide that the church should not be used this way, that this is an abuse of our sacred calling.
You wrote in your book quite a bit about this new generation of Christians, and you mentioned it here. So what is the goal of this new generation?
Yeah, there is a new generation that is coming of age in America, and they are engaging the public square differently. They're still theologically orthodox. They're still politically involved in the public square. They're not leaving politics altogether, but they're engaging differently with a broader agenda, more civilly and less partisan. And this is a good thing, because the Christian church in America is in serious trouble. Church attendance is declining, or in some denominations is simply failing to keep up with population growth. The Christian movement in America is exerting less influence over the public square and even the broader culture than it was even a decade ago. Part of the reason for this, as many sociologists have shown, is because the church has become so partisan that it is literally turning away non-believers in record numbers.
So do you think that the new generation can really redefine or take back Christianity?
You know, I don't know that any generation is ever going to get it right. If we could, maybe we would have gotten it done in the last 2,000 years of Christian history. But I do think this generation now has an opportunity that perhaps no generation before it has had in quite the same way, to show not just America, but to show the world that following Jesus is not hateful, it's not judgmental, it's not hypocritical, but that following Jesus transforms a person into being more loving and more compassionate. And if we can do that, I think we will finally show the world that this thing we call the gospel of Jesus Christ really is good news.
Jonathan Merritt, great to have you on again.
Oh, my pleasure.
Nice to see you. Enjoy your Sunday.